Adam Bandt, welcome to the program.
Morning.
Now, you're not happy with extending the life of another coal-fired power station, but what are some of the alternatives given the delays that we're seeing in the rollout of renewables and transmission lines?
Well, this isn't about Labor keeping the lights on, it's about Labor making the floods and fires worse. Coal and gas are the main causes of the climate crisis. And this is what happens when a government talks a big game on renewables, but then spends their time expanding coal and gas. Now, Labor could have spent the last 2 years getting solar panels on people's roofs and batteries in people's homes, especially renters, in a way that would cut power bills and make the grid more reliable. And instead, they've spent their time opening 13 new coal and gas projects. And we're seeing increasingly here that if you have your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time, you go nowhere. Keeping coal and gas in the system for longer slows down the transition to renewables. It sends mixed messages. It sucks up money and labour, and we're seeing the results of that now.
But we are where we are. We clearly have these delays, whether it's in batteries, Snowy 2.0, transmission line projects. What needs to happen now if it's not extending Eraring to keep the lights on?
Well, we've got existing technology like solar panels and batteries that could go into people's homes right now.
How long would that take?
Well, Labor's missed out on 2 years of
that's what
rolling
I'm saying.
that out. We've had to push
We are
them.
where we are now. So how long would it take to give everyone a battery and get that installed?
Well, the government should at least start by actually start getting solar panels and batteries into people's homes. They're not even doing that at the moment. We've had to push them to get some money in the budget for programs like that. It's been the Greens who've been pushing for that to happen.
How do they handle a few days of bad weather? I mean, yes, it would help, but they don't run for more than 24 hours.
Well, these are engineering issues to do with how do we manage the grid as we get out of coal and gas and into renewables. Now, it's a question of priorities. Where are you putting your money? Now, in Labor's budget, they said that they claimed $5 billion of climate change spending, but there was $50 billion of subsidies for fossil fuels. Now, what you're seeing here, David, is Labor's greenwashing fading before your eyes. What matters is what you do when you're in power and how you use money. And at the moment, increasingly, as Labor backs coal and gas in the system past 2050, it puts roadblocks in the way of the transition.
Do you accept that if we had more gas in the system, we wouldn't need to keep extending these coal-fired power stations?
There's plenty of gas in the system in Australia at the moment. Australia is awash with the stuff. The problem is that we send about 4 times as much, or use about 4 times as much in the overseas processing and sending as we do using it domestically. We're sending the gas offshore, and the profits as well
so
are very often
more gas used domestically?
I'm saying there's plenty of gas in the system at the moment to make the transition and to make it in the time frame that the climate scientists are telling us.
So divert more of the LNG we're shipping offshore to the domestic market.
Look, if Labor's saying the problem is that there's not enough gas in the system, then the answer is stop sending it overseas along with the tax-free profits. Like, the big corporations have been taking Australia for a ride. Like, in 1 year alone, 27 big gas corporations brought in over $70 billion of income and paid no tax. And then they tell us there's a gas shortage here in Australia. I mean, come on, there's not a gas shortage. It's that the big corporations are sending it overseas tax-free and Labor's letting them.
I want to ask your thoughts on the future Made in Australia policy of the government. I understand they'll probably introduce legislation for this next month. It'll be the framework that spells out all the things they're doing. It might also include the tax credits for green hydrogen. The coalition's opposed. What about the Greens?
Well, we'll have a look at the legislation. We've said very clearly there's big opportunities for Australia in areas like critical minerals, green hydrogen, green steel. Spent a lot of time during the election campaign in Queensland, for example, making the point that the best job for a coal miner may be another mining job, including in these critical minerals. But I guess there's 2 major things that we're going to look at when we see the legislation. One is what is actually being proposed. Are they going to create create the same kind of problems for critical minerals that they've created for gas, where Australia's awash with the stuff, but it's all going overseas and there's not enough left for us to make the transition? Is the public going to get a good return on any investments that we made? Does the public get an ownership stake in these corporations that we're going to be putting billions of dollars into?
There's a couple of interesting points there. You would want some assurance around how much green hydrogen, for example, stays in Australia for domestic use, and you would like some government ownership, would you?
With government and public ownership of these critical industries in the future is going to be very important to avoid making the same mistakes that Labor has made with gas, where they allow the big corporations to do whatever they like, and then all of a sudden it creates a series of problems. That's the first set of issues about the devil in the detail. But I guess the second issue is this. It's becoming apparent that Labor's future made in Australia is a future for coal and gas past 2050. Now, you can't have your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time. If there's going to be a big expansion in these areas, like green metals, like green steel and green hydrogen, then you can't have the labour and the investment being sucked up in new coal and gas mines that are running out past 2050. And again, it won't matter how many new wind turbines we put up. If you keep opening coal and gas and keep burning it, then the climate crisis is going to devastate Australia. And so Labor really can't have it both ways. Labor has to pick a lane. And just as we've done with previous legislation, including the electric vehicles legislation, we'll be saying to Labor, we're sick of the greenwashing. We're sick of this climate fraud. If you want to expand, if you want to work with the Greens to tackle the climate crisis, then don't also go and work with us on Monday and then go and work with the coalition on Tuesday to expand coal and gas and undo all that good work.
We have heard you for a long time push for an end to new coal and gas, and yet you do still pass government legislation like the vehicle emission standard you mentioned. So ultimately with this one, you're not going to stop the creation of a green hydrogen and critical minerals industry in Australia, are you?
Well, to get the vehicle legislation passed, the Greens had a big win against the gas cartel. We stopped Labor's bill to fast-track new gas projects by bypassing environment laws and taking away First Nations voices.
But on this one, I understand what you did there, but the question is, you're not going to stop, ultimately, a green hydrogen industry getting kick-started in Australia.
Well, again, it's the same issue, isn't it? Labor says that they want that to happen, but then you look at what Labor does, and Labor spends billions of dollars of public money to support the opening of new coal and gas mines and keeping coal and gas open past 2050. I mean, but this is critical, David, and this is where, I mean, the nuclear debate as well is a big dangerous distraction from Labor and Liberals' continued expansion of coal and gas, because that's what matters.
Let me ask you this. If the next election produces a hung parliament, you're in the box seat, would you be willing to demand, as a condition of any support for a minority Labor government, no new coal and gas?
We've been very clear that we want to see no new coal and gas, and that's what we're going to continue to push Labor to deliver, because Labor is expanding coal and gas at a time.
Does push mean actually saying, if it's a hung parliament, this is the red line?
Well, you're right that many of the pundits and commentators are saying that a very likely outcome is going to be a power-sharing parliament, and we'll make announcements closer to the election time. Right. But what I can tell you now is this. In a power-sharing parliament, the Greens will be the only ones there who aren't beholden to the coal and gas corporations like Labor and Liberal are, and we will push for them to stop opening new coal and gas mines. That is the only way we're going to tackle the climate crisis.
Let me ask you about migration, Adam Bandt. Do the Greens support any cut in the migration intake?
Look, I'm not going to give you a number about
I'm just asking
migration
for a yes or a no, whether you support a cut.
Well, I'm not going to give you a yes or a no or a number, and I'm going to tell you why, David. When a renter turns up to an auction, their competition is not someone who's come here from another country seeking a better life. It's a wealthy property investor who's got a big fat cheque in their pocket from Anthony Albanese that they use to push up the price of housing to a point where renters and first-home buyers
can't afford. Understand your views on negative gearing
afford.
and capital gains tax. Understand that. But I'm asking you whether you have a view at all on migration.
Well, my view on migration at the moment is this. Labor and Liberal are engaged in a migrant-bashing race to the bottom as a distraction from the real issues facing this country. Every time that there is a cost of living crisis, the rich and powerful turn around and blame migrants.
I'm not asking about Labor and the coalition here, Adam Bandt. With respect, you're the Greens leader. I'm asking you what the Greens' position is on migration. Do you support any cut?
I'm telling you, because this is coming at a time when there is a massive cost of living crisis and a housing crisis that is breaking people. And in response, Liberal and Labor are talking about migration.
I understand you're not a fan of Liberal and Labor.
Why do they want to blame migrants?
But I'm just not sure the audience would understand whether the Greens have
the issues, which is the big corporations that are price gouging, the wealthy property developers that are pushing up house prices.
Understand that point.
The big banks that are profiteering.
Understand where you stand on all of that.
Issue.
Understand where you stand on all of that. But just one more time for the audience who perhaps don't understand where the Greens stand on this. It's a big issue for a lot of people. Do you think we have too much migration?
I'm not going to engage in this race to the bottom that Labor and Liberal are engaging in. No. I believe that in this country of ours, working together, I'm proud of our multiculturalism, and that working together, we can build enough homes for everyone to have an affordable place to live.
Okay.
I'm not going to spend the next year in the lead up to an election blaming migrants for a problem that they didn't cause. It's the big corporations, the massive developers and the politicians that they've got in their pockets that are driving this cost of living crisis that's breaking people, and that's who we're going to take on.
I want to move to the war in Gaza, and I'd just like to clarify a couple of things. Do you support a two-state solution?
Look, our view is that Israelis and Palestinians are both equally entitled to live in peace and security and exercise their rights to self-determination in accordance with international law. And what we've seen to date is that not happen. And so what we support is the international community getting behind a stopping the invasion, stopping of the occupation of the Palestinian territories, which is absolutely critical, and then supporting Israelis and Palestinians in a process that will allow them to self-determine their own future.
I'm not sure that answers the question, though. Do you support two states?
Well, it's up to Palestinians and Israelis to equally enjoy those rights. And if that's what they choose to self-determine, then that's what they choose to self-determine. Our point is that it is the international community can no longer pretend that the slaughter and the invasion is not happening, coming at a massive toll. The occupation of Palestine and the Palestinian territories has to end, and then we need to support them to self-determine their own future so that both Israelis and Palestinians have that right under international law.
Do you support the idea of a Jewish homeland state?
Well, support Israelis as well as Palestinians, as I've said, both having their rights to self-determination under international law. Now, at the moment, what is happening at the moment is that we are seeing over 34,000 people killed. We are seeing a region brought to the brink of starvation, and this is a man-made famine. We're seeing the health system is on the brink of collapse. We now have an extreme war cabinet that is subject to orders to stop genocide. And our government just rings its hands and does nothing. I understand your criticism of Israel.
We've heard that. Do you also agree Hamas is a terrorist organisation that needs to be dismantled?
Well, they're listed as a terrorist organisation.
Do you support that?
And our point is now, well, it's just a fact. They're listed as a terrorist.
Well, I'm asking if you support it. Do you think they're a terrorist organisation?
Well, we're not arguing to change that. We're saying they're listed as a terrorist organisation.
So you agree they are a terrorist organisation?
Well, but the point is, what are you going to do? The Palestinian civilians cannot be collectively punished.
Sounds like you're having some trouble saying that Hamas is a terrorist organisation.
No, I just said it was. They're listed, and we condemned the acts of October 7th, and we've called for the perpetrators to be held to account. But now, what is happening when you have the international court saying stop the invasion of Rafah, and the very next day, within hours afterwards, this extreme war cabinet goes and bombs Rafah? Now is the time for the international community to take actions against this extreme war cabinet in Israel, because it is the only way that they're going to listen, and that's got to start with sanctions on this extreme war cabinet, the ending of Australia's two-way military trade with Israel.
Well, hang on, just on that.
And expelling the Israeli ambassador as well.
This suggestion from the Greens that there's Australian military exports to Israel yes, we do contribute to the F-35 fighter jet project along with 18 other countries. We use that fighter jet. We provide some non-lethal components. What else are you talking about there in terms of Australian weapons trade with Israel?
Well, I think that's pretty critical, what you just said. Australia makes the parts that open the bomb bay doors on the F-35 that allow bombs to be dropped on civilians.
Yeah, but this is a fighter jet that we use, that 18 different countries use. Are there any other weapons you're talking about that we sell to Israel? Because the government says we haven't sold weapons for 5 years to Israel.
Well, that's not what the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website says. That's not what the weapons manufacturers say. A DFAT website says there's $1.5 million worth of arms and ammunitions. Well, ask the government that, because they're not being clear.
Well, they're saying
that. Well, they're saying they're not. Then get them to explain what they are selling and why it is that the Department of Foreign Affairs, the weapons manufacturers and the United Nations are all saying Australia's involved in two-way trade with Israel.
OK, final one. I just want to ask you, this is obviously an issue that has, very polarised views in the community here in Australia. We saw yesterday morning the words on a Jewish school in Melbourne, Jews die. Would you agree there's a need to dial down the temperature to say that anti-Semitism, there's no place for it?
Well, I condemn those words. There's, of course, no place for that. And we've said from the very beginning, from the first moment this got debated in Parliament, no to anti-Semitism, no to Islamophobia, no to the invasion. And I think what you're seeing across the country is a very strong push for peace. People are fighting not only against anti-Semitism, but fighting to end the invasion of Gaza as well. And this has to end. And I can only say, David, we are at a critical point now where what happens in the coming few weeks may determine whether tens of thousands of more people die, whether children get enough to eat and drink. It is time to stop the invasion of Gaza, and it is time to bring pressure to bear on this extreme Israeli war cabinet to stop. And Australia should be doing more than hand-wringing. Australia should be taking action.
Adam Bandt, appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much, David.